I'm asking people to think about interrogating something they might have never interrogated. Think about how much anti-immigrant propaganda we've seen in the 20th century alone and who it's targeted at. It's targeted at working class people. Because I need to be uncomfortable about masculinity because I benefit from a sexist patriarchy. So I have to feel the discomfort of being a man in a patriarchy who is never asked to be uncomfortable. I need to take that on in order for things to change.
Hello and welcome to The Sacred. My name is Elizabeth Oldfield, and this is a podcast about the deep values of a wide range of people who are shaping our common life. Today, I am speaking to Jeffrey Boakye, who is an author of a range of books on music, education, kid stories. He's a teacher, educator. He teaches around education, and he is the presenter of the BBC Radio 4 programme, multi-award winning Add to Playlist. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love that introduction. It's like hearing your CV read out. I like that bit. No, it's good. Thank you. It's great.
We're going to go deep fast. Hopefully you've had a bit of a warning, but even if you haven't, I hope this is a generative question. What is sacred to you?
Oh, wow. What is sacred to me? Two things that I often circle back to when people ask me questions about what my core values are, what I believe in. And when I really think about what I hold dear in all of my work, the golden thread, it's got to be truth and joy. But they do come as a duo. I think it's very important. When I think about a lot of the books that I write, particularly for younger audiences, it's very, very difficult to write about the truth because you ask a child, is the truth a good thing or a bad thing? And they'll all do that. It's always somewhere in between because it can be incredibly difficult to wrestle with the truth. It can be uncomfortable. It can be painful, but also you sort of know that the truth is necessary. So when I'm writing about things that people don't like talking about, like I've got books that, headlong first into white supremacy, into homophobia, into misogyny, into colonialism, into all sorts of topics that create discomfort.
Make people clench.
Absolutely. The reason I'm doing it is because I'm just trying to cut back to some essential truth that allows us to be empowered to have the conversation, hopefully overcome the problem. At the same time, joy. I genuinely believe, and I don't mean joy just like having a good time or like numbing by like doing the thing that you like. I mean joy like the sense of you only get one rung in life. When you're awake, you're alive, and that needs to be celebrated. I really value the energy that's held between people. That's why that when I'm doing an event or meeting people or doing a podcast, to me, it's a special time, special place. It might never happen again. And that in itself is a celebration. So you got to have joy in everything. And I found that putting joy and truth together can make for interesting and to me, quite vital feeling products, even if they're sort of hard to place. Because you think, you're talking about this stuff that's really difficult, but there's so much joy in the way you're doing it, whilst also being hard hitting. So truth and joy, those are two things I hold sacred. How's that for an opening?
I love it. That is juicy. So this concept of our sacred values or our guiding principles, I'm fascinated in because I want to know what drives people. Like, what is their philosophy of life? How do they see the world? But I have a hunch, and I think the research shows this, that we don't always know. A lot of it's implicit, it's intuitive, and it's when these things are put under pressure, when they're like forced to the surface, that we can become really aware of them. And then often when we're making big decisions, hard decisions, when we feel compromised, we're like, oh, it turns out this is a deep value that's important to me. Can you think of a time in your life where one or both of those values has guided you, has felt like you could have taken a different path if you weren't so committed to them?
Oh, absolutely. To be honest, one of the things that I often have to do is engage with people. And I know that sounds obvious, but when you think about it, a lot of lines of work are quite solitary. Writing is actually quite solitary, but at the same time, you're writing for an audience. So you're always thinking about the people you're engaging with, speaking to people, be it in keynote speeches or training or, addressing an audience of any kind. It's about the communication. I think that the thing that has helped me is leaning on the truth or seeking a truth as the purpose of communicating. And that means that I'm not so hung up on how I am coming across. my ego hasn't got a lot of space to kind of dominate my thinking when there's something more important, which is the truth of what I'm trying to communicate. And actually, for me personally, that's kind of why education was a profession or a sector that I felt like I could exist in, but would also energize me, because it's all about communicating ideas, truths, drawing things out of people. And that stuff is so essential to me that it's a kind of fuel that allows me to not worry too much about my performance.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when you think about communicating and you think about being with people, most human beings, unless you're a sociopath, are seeking some element of joy in their interactions with other human beings.
Yeah.
That's where parties happen. That's where polite exchanges happen. That's where just, wearing particular outfits to sort of, to communicate a bit of yourself to the world. And it's all, there's a collective human joy, which I feel like humans just want.
We need,
and seek.
yeah.
And need, absolutely.
Yeah. Gorgeous.
Yeah. So that helps with my decisions. Yeah.
So tell us a bit about your childhood, and particularly like any big formative ideas that were in the air, political, philosophical, religious, that formed you. They're usually implicit rather than explicit, but not always. Paint a little picture of young Jeffrey growing up in Brixton.
Yeah. I mean, first things first, I was raised Catholic, so I've got a Ghanaian, very Ghanaian, West African Christian Catholic upbringing in the very riverbed of my biography. So that's all my mum. So I'd go to church with my mum. And I don't know, Catholicism, I don't want to speak out of turn, but you get very fluent in shame and guilt. Very fluent in those two things, because there's a lot of that sort of like talk of original sin and everything else. But what's interesting is I quite young took those spiritual teachings as stories that I could learn from. And I remember being very young and thinking, this stuff isn't literal, but the messages are very, very true.
Yeah.
And the teachings are really important, because I can see how you apply them every day, in every lesson, in every interaction. So it's a strange thing. Someone who conceptualizes stories as narratives, but also is like very much looking for the truth of those stories. Being Catholic meant going to church a lot.
Yeah.
And that meant a community. Yeah. I did not appreciate it until way later, but my parish, Corpus Christi Parish, Brixton Hill, is such an integral part of the shaping of me. And that is almost separate to Catholicism as a wider thing. I'm talking about the very local parish that I'm part of. I was an altar boy, which meant I was really in the church. Like I was up on the altar serving mass. I was working with priests. My mum was a Eucharistic minister. I became a Eucharistic minister as well. I went to Catholic schools.
What does Eucharistic minister mean?
Oh, it's the person that hands out the bread and the wine.
Right.
So it's the person that distributes the body and blood of Christ.
Yeah.
So technically, I've got that on my CV that I can give you Jesus' body. Yeah. I'm a Eucharistic minister. But I think that all of that, it just sort of means that I sort of learned the power of a community that wasn't my immediate home. Because I always feel very at home in a parish. And I think I learned that through Corpus Christi. And it does connect you to other people. And I remember having to, when I started reading at church, because I've got a stutter. No one believes me because I do radio for a living. I do things like this. I'm always talking to large audiences. But one of the priests wanted me to read the gospel at Easter. It's really long. It's like, I swear it's like 15 minutes of just you reading to the congregation. And he thought I could do it. And for whatever reason, he asked me to try it out and practice it. And when we were practicing, I just couldn't do it. I was just stuttering, messing up. And then he said, just calm yourself down, take a deep breath, and remember, this is about the congregation and about this moment. This is Easter. It's the biggest thing in the church calendar. And I think that was a big turning point for me, because I realized that some things are bigger than you. And it was about me being a sort of a conduit for this moment, for the congregation. And then all of my insecurities and fears just go out the window, because it's not about me, even though it is about me, because I'm the person at the front. And that was a real turning point. I must have been about 14 at that point.
That sounds like an origin story for Truth and Joy.
It does, doesn't it? It does.
And both your parents are Ghanaian. When did they come to the UK?
Yeah, very, very, very typical story for a lot of West Africans, Ghanaians, Nigerians. It would have been the early to mid 70s. So this is a generation of West Africans coming to the UK for kind of largely for economic reasons, post-colonial as well. You have to remember that Ghana was a colony of the British Empire. So in many ways, it was coming to a home they'd never been to for life chances. So as an immigrant, as the child of immigrants, I'm part of this game of go to the country that colonized you, get as many qualifications as you can, get a good job, doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer. So I failed. So I'm none of those things. But that's the sort of, that's the narrative that my parents were stepping into. And me and my sisters, we're that generation of kind of second generation immigrants who are having to make good on those sacrifices, which is probably why we overachieve, because that was the whole game plan.
Yeah.
Make it work.
How do you think that experience shaped them?
Well, I think that, first of all, any immigrant experience is going to be absolutely characterized by some kind of struggle, conflicts, because you just go into a place where you are quote unquote marginalized. There's instant suspicion, or not suspicion, but just all of the isms and obias, the racism, the xenophobias, the language barriers, despite being qualified to do so many things, not getting those opportunities. My mum did say in the 70s, it was fascinating, like how many jobs were available. You could like just walk from one job to the next. So economically, there were opportunities. And if you wanted to work, you could work. But then there's the structural stuff. She came to Brixton for a reason. Brixton wasn't like it is now. 1970s Brixton was not a nice place to be. And that's partly because it was a place of poverty. And poverty comes with certain social ills. I never really felt that because you don't know what you're growing into. I had a really happy childhood. I grew up on an estate, Mitesfield Estate, but there was definitely poverty around me. There was a concentration of migrants, of Black people. Brixton was a hub for various Black communities, traveller communities, Irish, just lots of people that weren't kind of, I don't know, that were originally, quote unquote, from Britain. And that meant that I was growing up in a multicultural urban environment that was kind of shaped a little bit by social deprivation, with a hint of church thrown in too. So
yeah.
So all of that would have been shaping my world in some way or other.
And you've spoken a little bit in various of your books about a kind of subtlety in that community that I think isn't that familiar to many of us, which was about Black Caribbean, like British Caribbean culture and West African culture being two related but different cultures, and language and music, and the kind of dominant youth culture when you're growing up was Caribbean culture. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's just a really simple thing that, in terms of the narratives of various communities that end up in a place, there's this kind of Windrush and post-Windrush generation that we still speak of under that title. And that's a huge moment because that's the arrival of a generation of people from the Caribbean who are going to become embedded into the economy and the culture of Britain. Now, that community, they were just here to work, and they were like incredibly aspirational, and you can see it from the outfits, actually. If you just look at the pictures of that Windrush generation, these are people that pay good money. It's very smart. This is not a kind of a countercultural sort of like, anti-establishment thing. These people are suited and booted, ready to work, probably quite small C conservative in their outlook as well, like a lot of people that want to get on are. But then at the same time, you then got this explosion of youth culture. And because of what you're met with, the deprivation, the marginalization, the racism, the prejudice, the discrimination, the institutions that aren't seeing you as whole, like the education system, criminal justice system, I could go on. that leads to some level of conflict and tension. So when you get this kind of a generation who are coming with such a rich culture, it's going to definitely be something which is, it's going to seed and grow in those communities, Notting Hill, Brixton, go to East London, like Hackney, like Tottenham. And so youth culture and this, what you can call black culture, but specifically a kind of Caribbean culture, is embedding itself into Britain. For me, I grew up around a lot of people from Jamaica because I grew up in Brixton, but I'm not Jamaican. But as a young person, I'm getting drawn, like any young person, towards exciting, cool youth culture. And for me, it was reggae, it was dancehall, it was the rude boy look, it was the way of walking, it was the patois, the way of speaking. And that became such a driving force in what we can call Black British culture. Yeah. It would be actually disingenuous to pretend otherwise. But at the same time, you get young children like me of West African heritage. That's not our culture. Like, we don't eat rice and peas. We eat jollof rice and wache. We eat other things. We eat yam and we all eat plantain. Everyone eats plantain, but you pronounce it differently. So you get this lovely meeting point of different Black communities. And what we've seen over time is that it's sort of grown into quite a rich tapestry of Black Britishness, which has various roots. It's a really beautiful thing.
One of your chapters in your book, I heard what you said, is entitled, I feel like I'm going to...
What is it?
I'm just going to sound like an idiot, but...
No, go for it.
Wagwan.
Yeah, Wagwan, yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, again, we're talking about patois, which is a dialect, you know. Yeah. Patois would be very commonly heard in places like Jamaica. It forces you to put on an accent, which is what kind of happens. Yeah. So it's what's going on. It's a greeting. Yeah. And obviously, in the way that London has evolved, and actually the whole of the UK, it's become synonymous with like blackness. You might hear people of various ethnic backgrounds saying Wagwan in a way that sort of nods to a Black British culture. Yeah. So this is something which I would have heard a lot growing up with all these Jamaican people around me. My neighbours were Jamaican. I went to school with Jamaicans. But it's not just Jamaica. It's, you know, Trinidad, hugely important country. And so that one greeting represents a linguistic development of Black Britishness, which we're still hearing today. Yeah. You still hear people saying Wagwan in a nod to blackness, maybe not understanding the specifics of where it comes from. Yeah. Which bit in the book was it? Because I've been greeted with that in places very far away from Jamaica and very far away from Brixton, like in Yorkshire, in very, very white areas. People see me and be like, oh, wait a minute, he's Black. I think Wagwan might be the appropriate greeting for this person.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that's what really struck me, because your chapters are around the things that people have said to you as a Black teacher in a largely white system, and sort of double clicking on them and helping readers understand the complexity of it, of like how that might land, what they might not understand about it when they're using it, like when it might feel a bit spiky and when it might not. Yeah.
It's what's interesting is that what young people tend to do of any generation, going back to the birth of the teenager in like the mid-1940s, is they're very quick and very good at learning social norms and social cues that they weren't born into because they're drawn to it. So when you think about even like the teenager, the original teenager in America, you know, who is just mainlining Black American culture that has been made kind of sanitized for the white mainstream, they're learning a whole cultural norm. Yeah. And I feel like young people always do that, which is why adults sometimes get scared of what young people are doing and what they're saying, because it's a completely foreign culture to the adult because we're not young. Yeah. So when we see young people dressing a certain way, speaking a certain way, having certain cultural values, it's a bit disorienting. Yeah. So for me, I was getting very well versed in definitely Black Caribbean culture. Like, I was listening to dancehall. I was wearing the clothes that I was buying in Brixton Market. I was I was copying my new idols as an adolescent black person. And this has got nothing to do with my parents' lived experience because they're not trying to be Jamaican.
Yeah.
But also Black American culture.
Yeah.
I'm getting really well versed in Black American culture. Like, people don't understand, before the internet, the world was a slightly more, like, it wasn't such a global place. And so Black American culture wasn't so mainstream to the white mainstream or to the dominant mainstream, I should say, as it is now. But for Black British people, these were our heroes.
Yeah.
Black American culture was a huge part of our lives.
Yeah.
We were listening to, hip hop. We were listening to, to funk and soul. We were watching Def Comedy Jam. Eddie Murphy was our hero, even though we're miles away.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things to remember is that you're sort of learning these cultures all the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something which put me in good stead to be a bit of a pop culture critic later in life, because I'd spent my whole adolescent learning various cultures, if that makes any sense.
It does. And you went to your local Catholic primary school, Corpus Christi Primary School, and it sounds like you were a pretty hardworking kid. You
absolute angel. What are you talking about? Yeah. I'm, I was always one of those kids that got on well with school and teachers got on well with me. Partly, it's just my winning strategy. Everyone's got a winning strategy and they can be positive or they can be negative. Mine was do really well at school.
Yeah.
And that keeps my parents off my back. And it means that teachers like me. So the insecure part of me that seeks validation is getting validated because of my schoolwork.
Yeah.
But also I was lucky enough to be very competent. Like, I've always been a reader and I've been fortunate enough to not have any barriers to accessing language, which means if you read and write well and fluently, you're going to be okay at school. And that was all me. So school was always a place where I could find validation. And that feeds itself because then teachers start finding opportunities to push you and to encourage you more. Yeah. Hence why I ended up doing academia and going to university and getting a first and all that good stuff,
Because you ended up for secondary school not going to school in Brixton, going a bit further away, going to private schools, is that right?
No, I wasn't private school. Okay. I went to a Catholic school in Battersea called Salesian College. Yeah. It would have liked to have been a private school.
Yeah.
It had the sort of like slightly ugly uniform that private schools like to have.
Isn't that funny? All our coding, I saw that word and was like, oh, well, that's...
yeah, exactly. No, it was just... No, it's a state school, more or less nestled in a housing estate in Battersea.
Yeah.
And it was an all-boys school as well.
Yeah.
But because it was Catholic, it was selective on those terms, but it was more or less bringing in everyone. So... so my school experience, secondary school, was very much a London experience. Like, I was mixing it up with everyone you could imagine, all over the world represented. Yeah, lots of black kids as well, lots of Irish kids, Philippines represented. So it was a very, very multicultural environment.
And when did you know you wanted to teach?
Well, this is the interesting thing. Like I always knew, even from when I was a kid, more or less, that I liked working with young people and children. So when I was at college, I would do play schemes and summer camps for free, just like in my own time. Because I've always had something of that like child's entertainer energy about me. And I just like the energy of children because they're so direct. Yeah. Truth and joy, you get that in a child, like whether you like it or not.
Yeah, yeah.
And they want to see you, which I think is one of the best things about children. They're really interested in your essence.
Yeah.
They see through ego very quickly, and whatever barriers you put up to present yourself to the world, kids just go around them and they want to know, who are you?
Yeah.
So teaching was always going to happen to me because after I did like editorial work and journalism for a few years, making good money, like I was working in Canary Wharf, suited and booted, making good money, I knew that I could use more of myself if I went into teaching and became a teacher.
Yeah. And we're going to get on to particularly the role of race in the education system and your experiences with that. But I want to zoom out a bit because you've told me that you're really interested in stories.
Yeah.
as we're thinking about the public conversation and how we build a common life, what would you say are the like mythological archetypes around teachers? Like what is the story, like the default story about a teacher that you think is most dominant in society?
Oh, it's really obvious. I mean, if you want to get into it, if you want to get into Carl Jung's archetype, shall we go there? Like the teacher is essentially treated as the sage, you know?
Yeah.
The holder of knowledge.
Yeah.
The national curriculum, 1988, this thing was written. It talks about the best that has been thought and said.
Wow.
And it talks about essential knowledge.
Huh.
And those phrases, they go back to the Victorian era. There's a Victorian poet called Matthew Arnold, and those phrases are from his book, Culture and Anarchy, which is basically the thesis is that if working class people are exploited too much, they're going to become anarchic. And the way to counter that anarchy is to give them culture. So these ideas are in the riverbed of the national curriculum. And the teacher then becomes the holder of culture and the holder of knowledge, the sage.
Wow.
But we know that the sage is not the sage. What do I know? What does the teacher know?
Yeah.
Really, the teacher is the innocent or the explorer. Like the teacher has to make sense of whatever it is they are the holder of in drastically changing contexts every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know? So the world looks different depending on which generation of kids you're teaching.
Yeah.
So I think really one of the things that we've leaned away from is the teacher as the apprentice, the teacher as the explorer, the teacher as the lover or the caregiver. Schools are not corporate places. Schools are not places of accountability, shiny floors, results, and, you know, metrics. Schools are places of love and care. Otherwise, just do it from home.
Yeah.
And any teacher that is in the game just for their subject and just to teach to give kids just to teach to content.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists because there's a reason why you're teaching.
Yeah.
You might as well just write a textbook if you want to just explore your subject. You might as well just be an academic. But to engage with people, there's got to be love in the room. There has to be.
So you just told me this incredibly beautiful story about teaching and what it can be, what it often is. It was really interesting to me that you said for your immigrant parents, it wasn't on the list of like high-stated, high-respect professions. And I would say if I just think of like what's the ambient narrative around a teacher, it's not always as beautiful as that, right? There's a like faint dismissive-ness maybe.
Yeah.
The image that comes to mind is like harried, overworked, grumpy.
Yeah.
Like maybe dissatisfied. Like the idea of teacher as noble vocation feels to me like it's maybe missing in the cultural stories we tell about it. Have you got a guess about why?
Yeah, I mean, I think that deep down, or not so deep down, there is a respect that comes with being a teacher. I know that it's almost like a title that you might hear. I've heard it from some of my uncles and aunts.
Rabbi or guru or should
exactly. Teacher. And it's because we know that teachers are this bridge of then and now and the future and the molding and the shaping of individuals into big conversations that span generations. I mean, it is a big deal. That's why teachers can sign for passports. Like, you know, teachers can do it, doctors can do it, priests can do it. So it's like, I think there is an implicit respect of, but then in terms of what the job is as in the paradigm of like capitalist success and like money making, it's just not the sexiest job in the world, is it?
Yeah.
I've not met a child that has said to me, I really want to be a teacher when I'm older, which is interesting because why not? I've met a few teachers that have told me they always wanted to be teachers, but when you meet kids...
I have a child who wants to be a teacher.
There you go. So we're out there.
I'm going to have to protect it in them.
Yes, definitely. And I think part of it is just to protect what it is about teaching that's special.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. And when you know it in yourself, people think you're golden. People think you're a magician.
Yeah.
You know, those teachers, you must have heard, there's something about her. There's just something about him. The way the kids are with him, no one else can do it. Yeah. They think it's magic. It's not magic. It's just people that are bringing something of themselves and their core values to this thing.
Yeah.
And they're not just being led by the gravity of, accountability or whatever the currency is that schools are valuing, be it grades or Ofsted result or league table, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So it comes through in so much of your work, this like profound commitment to the beauty and the dignity of the vocation of education. And one of the stories that you tell is kind of coming into the system, beginning to teach and realizing, like I asked you about archetypes of teacher, I wonder if you said to an AI, create an image of a teacher, what you'd get was a white woman, right? And you say this very clearly.
Yeah.
And that is just statistically, on average, what you're most likely to end up being becoming a teacher doesn't make you into a white woman.
It did for me. I became a white woman for a number of years. I'm an English teacher.
Right. Like seriously though, tell me more about that. I don't know whether to call it an awakening or like coming to an awareness of the way your identity was interacting with your vocation.
Yeah. I think the thing to remember is that you always have it. Your identity is multifaceted. It's complex. It's not just one thing, and it's not just how you're seen, and it's not just how you present, but you carry it with you in some shape, way, or form into every room, into every situation that you choose to be in. So I'm walking to teaching, and I've got my whole identity behind me. I've got, very dominant aspects of me. I'm male in a patriarchy. Crazy when you think about it. The amount of privilege that gives me. British, English speaking. It's my first language in England. This is huge privilege. Able-bodied, neurotypical. I'm straight in a heteronormative world. There's like a bunch of things in my identity makeup that give me huge social power. But I'm also black in a white supremacist paradigm in a world which is part of the world that's basically post-colonial, which is linked in itself intrinsically to scientific racism and white supremacy, and I'm carrying that too. But which bits of me are recognized and seen? My blackness wasn't talked about. And I didn't talk about it for reasons of survival, because the minute you start talking about the thing which is problematic, you become the problem. So in my early years of teaching, I did not talk about race or racism because, the risk is that I'm going to make my situation precarious, insecure, and not just in terms of like some like lofty ideological way. My job's on the line here. I've got rent to pay. I've got a mortgage to save up for. So I think that that's one of the big tragedies, that oftentimes people don't feel like they can exist as whole in any situation, and you leave bits of yourself at the door. The number of people I speak to, teachers, when I do talks, that come to me afterwards and they say, no one in my department knows that I'm dyslexic. No one in my department or my school knows that I grew up in care, or that I've had a bereavement that has really, there's a lot we don't talk about. My racialized background or my racialized identity was one of those things. But then eventually that grates. It starts to grate. And you got to do something with that. I'm teaching a curriculum which is ostensibly white, British, colonial, imperialistic. My black identity, my Ghanaianness is never referenced. It hasn't been referenced in my whole journey through the education slalom. And so when you get to that point, the truth of everything is being minimized, and it's got to come out some way. I wrote a book, people read it, they realized I was black after they read my book, and so the cat was out of the bag, and here we are, But it's like, it really did change my teaching, because I started to interrogate the curriculum, and I started to lean into the parts of me that I, prior to that had deliberately minimized. And that's when it gets interesting, because those are the parts that can see more than the dominant parts of you. And those are the parts that the kids actually can probably get a lot more from.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I want to try. So, what I want to name is, we've hit that a part in the interview, which, as you've rightly said very early on, will be making some people clench, right?
Yeah.
They're like,
here we go.
Post-colonialism and white supremacy. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Keep listening if that's you. So what I'm thinking about a lot at the moment is these words, right? These quite academic concepts that, if you double click them, have got like a richness of thought and theory behind them.
Yeah.
but that play out in our public conversation in quite complicated ways.
Yep.
And people have very different associations with them.
Yep.
And they've all been sort of contested and caught up by the culture war.
Yeah.
And so I'm really thinking, like, what would it mean to translate, like, for people who either hear the word white supremacy or like decolonial curriculum or whatever, and it's just too academic for them to get a purchase on, or have, for whatever reason, because of conversations they've been on or people they've heard talking about those voices, have a set of assumptions around those concepts that feel like make them feel hostile, make them feel this isn't for me, someone's about to attack me.
Yep.
I need to withdraw. That little spike of fight or flight we get in situations where there's a difference or a disagreement, or we're like seeking to connect, not quite making it happen.
Yep.
In like as plain language as you possibly can, could you say, like, in your I was going to say lived experience, but that is another one of those, like, in your life.
Yeah, in my life.
In your life, as you go about your day-to-day work as a teacher, what did that context mean of being the only black person in a system where most people were white and most of the texts were written by white people?
Yeah.
And just like, I want to understand, like, emotionally, what did it mean for you?
I'd throw that back to anyone listening to think about the part of themselves that is the most quote-unquote marginalized. And unless you're the most powerful person in the world and you've got absolutely nothing in your experience, lived or otherwise, that is in any way different, you're going to know what it feels like to have some part of you that the world does not speak to, that power does not speak to.
Yeah.
Everyone's got something.
Where you're in a space and you're like, I'm not welcome, or the status is not coming towards me. Yep.
Either you're not welcome, the status isn't there, institutionally or structurally, the world is not built for you.
Yeah.
You are going through things that the dominant majority in that context are not going through.
Yeah. Often, sorry to interrupt.
That's right, go on.
I'm sort of, you're really helping me think through. Often I think the clue that that's going on is you slightly start play acting.
Yep.
Like when I'm in very male spaces, I present differently than in female majority spaces.
Absolutely. And that's not an accident. That's a very simple strategy. It's a survival strategy.
Yeah.
You know, fight, flight, or freeze is one strategy, but also assimilation and replication is another. It's what babies do. Babies have a great survival strategy. They just copy the hell out of everything around them to the point where they have the same accent as the people around them. That's very difficult to do. You try it. You go and live in another country for 10 years. You won't have the accent.
Yeah.
So I feel like once you think like that, what tends to happen is you realize that it's the dominant identity that is being overbearing here. It's the dominant identity, not the person, right? We're all subject to the ideology. White supremacy, to use this example, is not something that you have to subscribe to if you're white. Now, that sounds like a crazy thing to say, but all I'm saying is you're allowed to challenge it. Well, how can you say that, Jeffrey? Well, first of all, people were thinking, well, you're black. It's easy to say that. No, it's not, actually, because I was born in 1982 in these great British Isles. You think I haven't got white supremacy in my lived experience? You think I've not been drinking the same water as you, the same media, the same oxygen? Of course I've got whiteness in me, but I had this other perspective from my family, from the people around me, and I've also sought it out. I don't have innate knowledge of colonial heritages. I've learned it deliberately, right? And why that's interesting is that if you get to this point where you understand that you don't owe anything to this dominant ideology, it allows you to be critical of it. And it actually loosens the straitjacket it has on you. My biggest job is to challenge masculinity, is to challenge heterosexuality, is to challenge transphobia, is to challenge neurotypicality. All the things that give me social power are the exact things that I need to challenge because they're like very comfortable straitjackets. The fear comes from the fear of being ripped apart.
Yeah.
And when you challenge something and you have aligned yourself closely to it, or it has actually rephrase, it has forced itself upon you, right? To the point where you think you are that thing. To challenge the thing is to challenge yourself. And that's where the fight part of flight, fight and freeze comes into it. That's why we had the English Defence League and the National Front and the British National Party. And while we've got these right-wing groups, because they're scared too.
Yeah.
It's fear. Enoch Powell was talking from a place of fear when he said all that nonsense about the black man will have the whip hand, the rivers of blood speech. He was terrified. But rather than flight or freeze, he chose fight.
Yeah.
And that's where you get into the culture wars. So one of the things I would say is, for people who feel uncomfortable, that discomfort, first of all, is partly necessary. Because I need to be uncomfortable about masculinity because I benefit from a sexist patriarchy. So I have to feel the discomfort of being a man in a patriarchy who is never asked to be uncomfortable. I need to take that on in order for things to change. It's like breaking a wall to get to a leaky pipe.
Yeah.
The wall needs to be broken. There's no two ways about it. Like, what are you going to do, right? So if there's fear, first of all, you're a human being. You're allowed to be scared. It's okay. We've been conditioned to be powerful all the time. That's how you get world leaders like Donald Trump and all these people. They're conditioned to be powerful and to exude power. But it's okay to be scared. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not have an answer.
Yeah.
You're a human being, for crying out loud. And then once you let that in, you can breathe a sigh of relief because you're allowed to be worried by white supremacy, by homophobia, by misogyny, because these things are worrying. And then the next step is to seek out, it goes back to my first word, I wasn't joking, the truth of the situation. Because when you've got the truth, you know what happens? Fear dissipates. The truth makes it very difficult to be scared of something. Because fear is fear of the unknown. That's why that most people call up an expert to fix something in their home because they're scared of doing it themselves because they're going to destroy it and they don't want to destroy it.
Yeah.
But when you know something, ask me to find an electrician who is scared of taking apart the wiring in a house.
Yeah.
That person is not scared of it because they have the knowledge.
Yeah.
That's why I can talk about things like colonialism, not because I'm a special person, not because I've got some innate knowledge or I'm an expert. I've just done a little bit of reading to give me a bit of knowledge that means that I'm able to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And most people haven't had that knowledge given to them because the education system is propping up certain ideologies.
Yeah.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
I always remember James Baldwin in the letter to his nephew, where he has this lovely thing where he's like, it is incredibly destabilizing for white people to come to. I remember just feeling so like, thank you for your kindness. The grace for someone to name, acknowledging our, like what we have received and our connection in systems.
Yeah, I mean, just on the back of that, I think that it's so hard to explain it.
Yeah.
Because I'm asking people to think about interrogating something they might have never interrogated.
Yeah.
Which is actually very difficult. It's almost like therapy work.
Yeah.
To see the thing as external to you, extrinsic to you.
Yeah.
And then to challenge it.
Yeah.
I challenge things that have been internalized in me all the time.
Yeah.
That's my best work.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah.
Like, I challenge Britishness as an idea.
Yeah.
And people don't raise an eyebrow because they think he's black. He's allowed to challenge Britishness. But mate, I'm British. I'm 100% British. But because I want to hold it to account and understand this world I'm in, I challenge it. I criticize it. I explore its history. And I feel like everyone has the right to do that. And actually, as we go on in society, it becomes more and more not just a right, but it becomes a bit of an urge. Like, this is an important job that we all have to challenge power. Because power does not care about you, man. Like, trust me, power paradigms don't care about individuals. People care about people.
Yeah.
You know?
So I have this phrase that's been going around in my head recently. Equality is a narrow ledge to live on. And by that, I mean, so often when we feel excluded or marginalized or disempowered, for whatever reason, whether that's the white working class or women or people of color, whatever it is, there is this very understandable sort of psychological defense mechanism, which is I'm not worse, I'm better, right? Like I feel like it's so easy to overshoot, right? In trying to create a stable sense of self that rejects external shaming or dismissal or contempt, real or perceived, we naturally go to, and it is partly fight, flight, freeze, this attack back. And I'm really interested in the places we can find to stand that are, I'm not better than you, but I am equal with you. And for me, that's really grounded in a theological anthropology. And I wonder if part of what's gone wrong in our public conversations in this escalating culture war is we don't have spiritual or philosophical shared commitments to that human equality. And so it does become slightly zero-sum fighting out of which group can get the most power.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, what you have to remember is the propaganda of different kind of, the propaganda of classism, of racism, of the patriarchy. And it is propaganda. I use that word deliberately. These ideas, they serve someone, they serve something.
Yeah.
Racism is the byproduct of race.
Yeah.
Race and scientific racism serves something. Well, what does it serve? It serves the justification of the exploitation of black people who were designed as black in the 1660s, all right, which is quite a long time ago, but not that long ago. Before that, there was no such thing as black people and white people. The word race was only used to describe groups of objects, maybe groups of animals. It was never applied to people.
I learned the other day it came from breeding, from
there
horse
you go.
breeding.
There we go. So we've just done a TED Talk in about 15 seconds that I never got in my whole educational career. Once you understand what something is serving, then the propaganda that perpetuates it becomes really transparent. So all this us and them and all these divisions is serving a purpose. Because if you're going to physically exploit labor, right, from stolen people for 15 generations and an unknown number of deaths and just the most inhumane actions meted out by criminals who are so devoid of humanity in these actions, the only way they can do that and still see themselves as human is to justify it. So racism is doing a big job for the propaganda that you need for the European imperialists to make Europe a thing in this time of colonialism. It's really simple, right? And that same propaganda, you can find it everywhere. The class system. Mate, there's only two classes. People that own stuff and people that don't own stuff. And we work, and the billionaires are out there and they own stuff. But that is linked inextricably linked to things like white supremacy, because that's where a lot of the wealth comes from. So I feel like understanding how these not how these messages are shaped, but why they're shaped, allows you to sort of sidestep this invitation to perpetuate the ideology. You are being told to be uncomfortable with these conversations because the system has to win. And the system is something that we all participate in. I know that firsthand because as a teacher, I'm participating in the education system. It's one of the great, arms of society: education, criminal justice, finance, the arts, I don't know. So I have to stop and think, what is the education like and why is it shaped in this way? What is that serving? Who is it serving? And if you keep tracking back long enough, you realize what it's serving. And then you can find your common enemy. If nothing else, just do what comedians do. Find the common enemy that we can all funnel our energy towards. Someone we can all say, that's who we're up against. And that's where you can make them the butt of the joke, or you can identify them as the real problem. The issue we've got is that we're manipulated into thinking that everyone is the enemy. But the common enemy, if you keep going back far enough, and you're going to end up in the same place every single time. It's going to be, gross capitalist expansionism. It's going to be colonialism and imperialistic ideas from Europe in about the 18th century onwards, and that becomes a big part of the problem for humanity. That's led to this dystopian world that we live in, and I feel like that is as good of a shot as we've got. It's more complex than that, but I know from experience that a lot of the myths that people tell about themselves that create difference to other people who believe in other myths, you're actually talking about the same thing. You're actually referencing the same experiences. You actually want the same thing for your babies. You actually have different names for the same God. So I feel like sometimes it's the commonalities. And I'm an optimistic person because I look out and I see people wanting to get on.
Yeah.
You see people, you can get a room full of people laughing together. Despite what's going on in the world. From very different places with very different cultural backgrounds. And enjoying the same art and the same food. And humans aren't that different, man. We're like 99.8% the same DNA when you cut it back to genetic code. So, I just feel like maybe understanding that these messages, they aren't given from on high, they're propaganda. And that propaganda serves a purpose.
I want to talk about class. This is a book that you published in 2022, so I'm sorry to quote it back
Go
to you.
it.
But you said, on a book about class, a chapter about class, you said, let me interrupt myself here to say this is a horrible chapter to write. It's all tense and uncertain due to the slippery relationship between actual wealth and signifiers of wealth. And it's one of the most difficult things I've ever written. And you relate this to your style choices of like showing up to school, wearing tweed jackets, very smart, deliberately trying to push back at some of the stereotypes, I think, of black men. And you said, so when I turn up looking affluent, but not in a stereotypically ostentatious way, we have come to associate with gaudy rappers and athletes. I'm a glitch in the system. Love that line. What? There is definitely a turn, and there's, things have really shifted since 2020, 2022 in these conversations. People are talking about post-woke, and there feels like there's been a huge pushback against, we don't even use the phrase DEI, but anyway, that whole thing. And there's a kind of pushback on it from people who would call themselves more conservative or traditionalist. And then I think there's a kind of more Marxist materialist pushback, which is like all of these identity categories are less important than money, right? Basically, it's class, and we've lost our sense of class solidarity. Identity politics was a wrong turn. We just need to go back to class solidarity, and the workers rise up against the billionaires. It's really not a very clear, concise, teed-up question, but I'd love to hear, where do you think we are in the conversations around identity, and how much of a factor do you think class is underneath all of this?
All right, first of all, it's not race or class. It's race and class. All right? And what you have to ask yourself is, why would anyone go to such lengths to separate those two things and to minimize what is a conversation about racism and then kind of say the real conversation is this other thing, class? Why would there be a need to do that? We have to think, why would you want to minimize the conversation around racism? It's because racism and where it stems from has been serving a very useful purpose, which obviously relates to class and the economy. Because if we're talking about it, transatlantic slavery is a conversation about money. The triangular trade, 300 years of trading, which was hinged on the exploitation of free labor, was about money. That's why Europe is wealthy. And that's why we have a conversation about reparations that will never go anywhere, because people don't want to give their money away and they don't want to level the playing field, because the economy of the world would have to upend itself if Africa as a continent was given what it was owed and is given what it deserves and was given back. Even on a simple note, it's stolen artifacts. Just even that would start to upend the power balance, because the big mythology that we believe in is money. Now, the thing about class is that it allows for a very, very convenient way of sidestepping all these other identity issues that are seemingly not important. Because basically you can say things like, well, it doesn't really matter about those aspects of your identity because it's about who works where and who
Just
earns
fix the
what.
tax
And
system.
exactly. And actually, we're in complete solidarity as one group against the billionaires. Poverty is one of the great social ills and it needs to be looked at. The issue with that poverty is that it is not exclusive. It's not separate from these other things that the country is built on. And I think that might be difficult, a conversation to have, but it's a really necessary conversation to have. It's really important to understand how these things intersect. And at the same time, it allows you to make amazing progress in both lanes. If you really look at what's going on in class in this country and look at the fact that, when the slave trade was abolished, billions of pounds, the equivalent of billions of pounds were paid off to slave owners in this country, including some of the families that would give us prime ministers in the future. You realize that the class system is inextricably linked to these economic, just crimes, to use a very strong term, but it's criminal to sort of to do that, to exploit labor. You realize that the people that have been subject to propaganda for a century plus, look at the 20th century, think about how much anti-Black, anti-Asian propaganda, anti-immigrant propaganda we've seen in the 20th century alone, and who it's targeted at. It's targeted at working class people, right? Because working class people are a great target to be distracted from this other thing. So you can't separate them. And I think that if I can do it in 5 minutes of a podcast with you, if you've got, 18 years at school, there's enough time to teach everyone all of that. And you come out the other end and go, all right, now I know where I can align my efforts. And I feel like the reason why we don't learn that stuff speaks to, again, my earlier point. There's a very good reason why we're not taught it, because we're not supposed to have these thoughts. We're not supposed to be empowered to challenge, the racial hierarchies that have been created or the class hierarchies that have been created. And I feel like, that's it. To me, it's not even like a culture war situation. I'm not trying to win an argument here. Like, there are facts of how the world is shaped. I'm trying to find out what those facts are. And then at the same time, I'm trying to think about how we can leverage what we've got to make things better.
Jeffrey Boakye.
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. Jeffrey Boakye, thank you so much for speaking to me on The Sacred. Well, all the time I was talking to Jeffrey, I was thinking about words, which is appropriate because that's what he writes and thinks about a lot. And I've been deep in his work, and it has provoked me, as good teachers do, to be really pondering how we use words, how they accrue meaning, how they accrue different meanings in some communities or some settings, and other meanings in other communities and other settings. This sense I have of the slipperiness of words, the way they're not fixed, the definitions are not fixed, that they are these kind of semiotic bombs. They are so connected to their contexts and to their speakers that we really have to be paying quite close attention in order to receive the words that are given in the way that they're meant. And I was, firstly, truth and joy. What a beautiful thing to try and ground yourself in, to try and hold together. And then really quite early on, and I love how self-aware Jeffrey is about this, he talked about, part of his work being to talk about colonialism, homophobia, misogyny, and white supremacy. He rightly said the things that can make people clench. I also often use the word clench, so I think it's one of the reasons we connected. That there are particular phrases that maybe always, but especially now, are very semiotically dense word bombs, right? Which can be said in a very dry academic way, can be said with a dismissive sneer, can be said with a tone of like personal experience and woundedness. And yet we don't necessarily have, any of that context when we're using them. I'm really interested in this concept of context collapse, that part of what makes our information environment and our ability to hear each other so destabilizing and so difficult is what the online environment does, particularly social media, but really the kind of mass searchable database of the internet is it pulls things out of their context. You see AI doing that all the time. And that actually that's a dismembering. There's something violent about that because, as I was saying, the words and their context are might not be as separable as we think. They're not just meaning tokens. They are in relationship with the sentence and the paragraph and the person and the context around them. And so I'm really aware that for some of you, immediately those 4 words, misogyny, colonialism, homophobia, white supremacy would have made you go, yep, this guy is interested in the kind of things I'm interested in. He's alert to the systems of the world. He's not naive to systems of oppression. And you would have maybe sat up a little bit and started listening more closely. And for some of you, it would have had the exact opposite effect, right? You might not even have got as far as this reflection. I won't be talking to none of you by this point. Because those words land really differently depending on our context, our background, our familiarity with it, our academic level, that kind of thing. And I'm someone who's very interested in communication and in really connecting and really understanding what each other mean, right? Rather than kind of immediately closing off to each other and getting defensive and going into fight or flight, really leaning in to go, okay, what does this person mean by this? What's their context? What's their story with it? So yes, 4 loaded, powerful words that came up a lot that could almost be, completely different words for how differently they land with people. He had this lovely phrase, in the very riverbed of my biography. It's just beautiful way of thinking about where we've come from. And that beautiful vision of the Catholic parish as a place of welcome, as a place of hospitality, as a place of community, as a place, it feels like an archetype of the thing that we're all really longing for, and that sociologists and policymakers are all trying to, how do we rebuild the village? How do we rebuild the neighborhood? How do we have people who know each other, who are in systems of mutual care? And I keep coming back to this question of, can you have it without religion? I think what I'm learning is that community for the sake of community is not a strong enough reason to hold people together. You need another thing, right? You need something to be focused around. Religion is one of the strongest anchors to hold us together. Oh my goodness, he speaks so beautifully about education and about teaching as a vocation, as a calling. He said, schools are places of love and care. To engage with people, there has to be love in the room. And I really love it when people love what they do, right? When they are so aware of the noble calling of their vocation, as well as the tensions within it, right? Because any thinking person knows the tensions, hopefully within their own tradition and their own community and their own profession. And it really set off a train of thought for me about this care, about this love, about the way that lots of these professions like nursing or care work or teaching are just irreconcilably relational, right? We know from all the studies about how people learn that unless we feel kind of safe and acknowledged, it's actually really hard to take in information. The bit of our brain that is involved in learning can't really do it when we're in fight or flight, can't really do it when we're tense or anxious or we feel attacked or dismissed. And so this sense that he has, that the relationship between the teacher and the student is all powerful. It's really borne out in the research, in the pedagogical research, I believe. I'm much less of an expert. And we know that the same is true, right, in nursing, that patient outcomes, patient satisfaction is so much higher when they have someone who treats them like a human being, who treats them like a person, who asks their stories. And yet all of these systems are increasingly unrelational. I've done a little bit of work with an organisation called the Relationships Project who are trying to change that. But it feels like as we have tried to, for good reasons, like fairness and measurability and outcomes, standardise education and healthcare and lots of these other professions, that magic source of care, of love, of connection, of relationship between the student and the teacher, between the nurse and the patient, whatever it is, has been increasingly squeezed out and pushed to the sides because it's not measurable and it's not controllable. You as an employer cannot demand and should not demand that a teacher or a nurse or a doctor loves their patients or their students, right? Adopts this posture of care towards them. But it worked for a very long time on this system of kind of humane and trusting institutions who understood this and didn't see themselves as a kind of bureaucratic machine, but as something slightly different. And I just love that there's people like Jeffrey trying to say, basically, teaching is about love. And that's what makes it so amazing and also so difficult sometimes in this context to do well or to do without burning yourself out. We talked about, and we tried to really get into this thing about, and I didn't do a very good job of kind of narrowing the question, but about kind of white supremacy or the role of colonialism in the curriculum. And he said that think about the part of you that is marginalised, the most marginalised, like the least welcome in the spaces that you're in, and how you feel when that happens, like what effect that has on you. And it made me think how similar some of the conversations that I hear in spaces that are wanting to talk about race in particular. What does it mean to be a person of colour in certain settings and certain institutions? What are the dynamics of that? What's helpful to be aware of? And when I'm around more conservative religious people, maybe just, let's stay with conservative religious people, conservative Muslims and conservative Christians, which honestly have loads in common. And it puzzles me how the story that we tell that they should be suspicious of each other, that there are two communities who really, really care about God and really, really care about the family and tend to have kind of socially conservative values. Seems like a group that should be able to be allies with each other in some ways. But often, let's say a conservative religious person who's been on the podcast who doesn't believe that abortion should be legal, for example, or has particular views about sexuality. I know this from guests. They often feel in mainstream spaces like they have to hide part of themselves, right? That they have to be, I think in Jeffrey's language, you could say that they feel marginalized. And again, it feels like these conversations are going past each other. And that if we could really listen for the just intensely human experience of not feeling welcome and of not feeling allowed to be yourself, and what the effects of that are and how we might all kind of just soften a little bit to each other, we could possibly, I feel like this is a big ask right now especially, but we could all possibly soften towards each other a little bit and just name and notice the tendency in us to feel tense and spiky when we don't feel like our view or our part of our identity is the majority. And notice it happening with other people. See what we can do to be a blessing or to be a bridge builder in those situations. Find the common enemy. This has stayed with me like a little brain worm because I think this is one of the things about this interview that I don't agree with. And it may be that I'm just very naive, but I think that, I am always going back to something Giles Fraser said once years ago, which is you're not, the tradition that we share, we're both Christians, the New Testament says you should love your enemies. And he says, it says you should love your enemies, not that you shouldn't have them. So maybe it's all right to have a common enemy as long as we love them, right? As long as we are able to bless them and seek to dismantle ideas and systems, not dehumanize people. And this is one of my most controversial opinions. Almost everywhere I go, people say, yes, but. That, like, some people are beyond the pale. Like, some people are irredeemable. There are some lines we should draw. I just have this intuitive sense that no. And that's okay. I might be wrong. I'm thinking about it. But I think the reason that I find the common enemy stuff, I agree with a lot of the analysis. And if the common enemy can be systems and structures, I think I quoted Simone Weil on this recently, but I think it's Hannah Arendt. She talks about, like, and this goes back to the relationships project stuff, dehumanizing bureaucratic systems can be our common enemy because they turn us against each other and we all suffer under them. But when a particular person or a particular people group become our common enemy, that I think dehumanizes us all. Like, the very wealthy have a huge amount of power in the world and should be taking it seriously and using it responsibly and noticing the impact on their own souls, frankly. But they are still human. And also need liberating from these systems that oppress us all. I think extreme wealth is as bad for your soul as every other place in these systems. And the common enemy thing also I get nervous of because I think right now what's happening in the UK is the common enemy has become immigrants, right? Not for all of us, but for a lot of people who feel disenfranchised or who left out or just scared of the future. We do long for a common enemy and we will look around for some, and there is no guarantee it will be the right one. I don't know what the right one is, but my guess is everyone's going to disagree about who the right one is. And right now it's immigrants in the UK, and that I have nerves about and think could lead us into some really dangerous and dark places. So, do we need a common enemy? Is there something in the human condition that means we have to hate somebody and we might as well just try and make that the right person? Or is it possible that we transcend that enemy-friend distinction? I'd love to know what you think in the comments or by writing in. Help me think this through because it's a really deep, sticky one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Sacred. Our team are Joe Downey, Lydia Taylor, Amari Ugandran, Lizzie Harvey, and we are edited by Drew Hawley. Our music is by Luke Stanley, and Theos is a project of the think tank Theos. We'd love you to come and check out our wider work. I'll speak to you next time.